Well, it's stories like this in our Bible that make me a follower of Jesus. It's stories like this one in our Bible that keep me from running off and joining the growing church of the agnostics. Stories that tell us of a Jesus who chose ordinary, everyday, questioning, wondering human beings to be his closest friends and his helpers. And perhaps, I think, I'm a clergy person today because all these years later, Jesus still does. Last week, we celebrated Easter with a full sanctuary, full of alleluias and lilies and trumpets and all sorts of wonderful. I loved last week. I loved Easter. But this story that Tim just read is so important to me because this is where it gets real. Last week was Cadbury eggs and sugar-filled Peeps. This week, it's meat and potatoes and gravy. This week, John gives us the rest of the story. Easter Eve arrives and the disciples have locked themselves in a room because they were afraid. And I, for one, can't blame them. I probably would have been afraid too. They'd had a rough week. And they had to be exhausted. Everything they thought they knew had been turned upside down on its head. They had written a future story with Jesus and had a good 5-year plan, and then the rug was pulled out from underneath them. I've been in that position. Maybe you have been too. You think you're in a relationship that's going somewhere, or a job that you think is going to be long-term. And suddenly, in a matter of a couple of days, everything has changed. And you aren't sure what's going to happen next, or what choice you should make. And that is a very scary place. So I don't fault the disciples. And I personally don't get too self-righteous with poor Thomas. I personally think Tom has gotten a bad rap down through the ages. I mean, when someone calls you a doubting Thomas, they're not offering you a compliment. Yet I think Tom just says what the rest of them had been thinking before Jesus showed up to them. Thomas just wanted to experience what everyone else had, and what sounded to him a little bit crazy. Now, Thomas was a tough-minded skeptic, and I know a few of those, and there might even be, dare we say, 1 or 2 or more than that in this congregation. And being from the show-me state of Missouri, I can't fault Thomas. Thomas was uncertain and anxious about their future. All the disciples were. I mean, Jesus found them in a locked room, not once but twice. They were afraid. And can you imagine that situation? A big group of scared people all closed up together. Their fear and anxiety begin to wear on one another. The stress level increases and the bickering begins. Everybody is annoying. And there you are, breathing hot, sticky air with a bunch of people who are usually quite likable who are now driving you insane. That's not any fun. And no one wants to be a part of that group. That group of people, that frightened, closed-up group of people, was on its way to self-destruction. Because I think that's what happens when we allow fear to be in the driver's seat. The disciples couldn't imagine what their future might look like or what they should do next. All they knew is that everything had changed. But all of a sudden, in that room, something happened. Something that was full of love and hope and new life. Something that they couldn't quite explain and that felt a little bit crazy. But made all the difference in their lives. The disciples had some kind of encounter with the love of God, and Easter happened. And Easter still happens every day. And thank God it does, because left to our own devices, any of us might find ourselves hiding behind locked doors, afraid and getting stale, just waiting to self-destruct. Easter happens in moments where there is fear and anxiety and stress, and the love of God shows up unexpected. But here's a fun little twist with this story. For the disciples, not only did Jesus show up unexpectedly, he went and gave them a job. You might remember, he does it with Mary, too. He tells the disciples, just as God sends me, so I send you. And that's the rest of the story. Easter gives us a job. Now, giving people a job doesn't always preach well on Easter morning, but I think perhaps it does this week. Easter is a reminder that showing up on the week after Easter and being a follower of Jesus means work. And what is that work? Well, as one preacher says, the church's mission is to bear unceasing witness to the love of God. Or stated in Shanna's paraphrase, help make every day Easter for someone. The big downtown church I served in seminary had stained glass windows all along the back. And they were Easter lilies. I loved them. I loved those windows. Because they were there to remind them that they were called to be Alleluia, singing, trumpet playing, love sharing Easter people every day. Not just one Sunday a year. Now, I know this sounds a little evangelical and not very much like us here at First Church. But here's what I know, friends. Here's what I know. There are a lot of people who are questioning, doubting people, most of whom have no idea that a crazy kind of wonderful church like this exists. And they need a little peace. And they need a little Easter. And you may think that you aren't good enough or smart enough or Christian enough to do it, but Jesus is asking you to share a little bit of your Easter with the world. The crazy, radical love that doesn't make any sense, that is Easter. Because somebody in your life might just need it. And I promise you it's liable to happen in some unexpected way, and you may never know the difference it makes. But that's Easter. And it's 365 days a year. Here's an example. When Ryan and I were in Macon, we were visiting someone at University Hospital. And there was a neighbor of one of our members who happened to be there. And we really didn't know him very well, and we didn't know what they were in for or whether or not it was very serious, but we stopped in anyway. They had just found out it was very serious. And they were afraid. and they were in a small room. And we didn't know it until much later. But they told us that we brought the love of God made real into that scary moment. We breathed a moment of hope and life into that situation. And we didn't expect it, and they didn't expect it, but in that moment, something happened. That's an Easter moment. And any one of us can make such a moment happen. We just have to be willing to open our hearts just a little wider in order to say, I've experienced something I can't quite explain. But it was a moment full of love and hope and wow. And my guess is a few of you have had such an Easter moment because you're here. In this church, in that pew, when you could be doing 100 other things in this city on a Sunday morning, but you're here. Why? I think it's probably because at some point in your life you had an encounter with the love of God made real in your life. You had an Easter moment, and in that moment you may still have 100 questions and doubts, just like Thomas. But I'm guessing you had an Easter moment. And the rest of the Easter story is that when you encounter someone who needs a little breath of love and life and hope breathed into their scary situation, Jesus asked you to share a little bit of Easter. My favorite part of Easter, at least this year anyway, is remembering that Jesus trusted himself and God's message of love to a bunch of folks who were scared and uncertain and confused. And surely he still does. And I think questioning and wondering and dreaming is okay, Thomas. Because the love of God is bigger than we can ever imagine. And it's bigger than what I can make sense out of. And it couldn't be contained by an old cave covered with a rock. Because somehow the disciples experienced it after Jesus' death. And I think we can still experience it today. A crazy, radical love that doesn't make any sense. That's Easter. In unexpected ways, in unexpected places. And the scariest part of all is realizing that Jesus trusts you and me to help unlock those doors and help breathe a little hope and love to all those folks who are still afraid. A dear friend of mine wrote in her blog this week, God does amazing, powerful, miraculous, transforming work in the world every single day. And if we're paying attention, we might even get to witness it. And if we walk in the ways of Jesus, we might even get to take part in it. Some days, she says. And that, my friends, is Easter. And my prayer for us this day is that together we'll help one another be Easter people all year long. And the First Congregational Church of Los Angeles will no longer be the best kept secret in town because we are each sharing the crazy, radical love of God that we have found here. An Easter community, 365 days a year.